Tonight we're going to talk about feminism, and I look at all these occupied seats and come to the conclusion that feminism is a topic that is still alive and kicking. Personally, I am interested in how being a feminist is avoided by many women in the academic world. It is somehow something to be ashamed of. There is this huge prejudice of feminists being these whining women who hate men. I find this prejudice very peculiar, for feminism has the goal to show that women are rational human beings too, able to participate in society the same way as men do. I find that the equality between men and women is something we should be able to talk freely about, and that is why we are here tonight. We are going to ask ourselves, what have we learned from all these generations of feminism? Is feminism completed? And I am sure we will have a very interesting evening with lots of quality discussion, but first I will give you a schedule of this evening. To avoid conclusion, it is important to determine the definition of feminism. Therefore, I will show you a few minutes of the TED Talk of Roxane Gay, who talks about what it is to be a feminist. After this short film, Berteke Waaldijk of Utrecht University will start off with her lecture. Professor Waaldijk is specialized in gender, culture and citizenship, and she will give us an oversight of the history of feminism. Our second guest speaker of this evening is Peta Hinton, also lecturer at Utrecht University. She will give a lecture about the current feminist debates. Then we will have a short break of 10 minutes, and after the break, I will introduce to you our lovely student panel. It's put together especially for this evening. We will debate for 20 minutes, and after the debate, there is another 20 minutes for you to ask your questions to our speakers and to our student panel. But first, the TED Talk of Roxane Gay, called Bad Feminist.
I am failing as a woman. I am failing as a feminist. I have passionate opinions about gender equality, but I worry that to freely accept the label of feminist would not be fair to good feminists. I'm a feminist, but I'm a rather bad one. Oh, so I call myself a bad feminist. Or at least I wrote an essay, and then I wrote a book called Bad Feminist, and then in interviews, people started calling me the bad feminist. So, what started as a bit of an inside joke with myself and a willful provocation has become a thing. Let me take a step back. When I was younger, mostly in my teens and 20s, I had strange ideas about feminists as hairy, angry, man-hating, sex-hating women, as if those are bad things. These days, I look at how women are treated the world over, and anger in particular seems like a perfectly reasonable response. But back then, I worried about the tone people used when suggesting I might be a feminist. The feminist label was an accusation. It was an F word and not a nice one. I was labeled a woman who doesn't play by the rules, who expects too much, who thinks far too highly of myself by daring to believe I am equal, superior to a man. You don't want to be that rebel woman until you realize that you very much are that woman and cannot imagine being anyone else. As I got older, I began to accept that I am indeed a feminist and a proud one. I hold certain truths to be self-evident. Women are equal to men. We deserve equal pay for equal work. We have the right to move through the world as we choose, free from harassment or violence. We have the right to easy, affordable access to birth control and reproductive services. We have the right to make choices about our bodies free from legislative oversight or evangelical doctrine. We have the right to respect. There's more. When we talk about the needs of women, we have to consider the other identities we inhabit. We are not just women. We are people with different bodies, gender expressions, faiths, sexualities, class backgrounds, abilities, and so much more. We need to take into account these differences and how they affect us as much as we account for what we have in common. Without this kind of inclusion, our feminism is nothing.
Your attention please for the lecture of Professor Waaldijk.
an historical tour along feminist highlights in the past. My main point will be that the book that gave this meeting its title, Generational Feminism, by Iris van der Tuin, my colleague, argues that in order to think productively about feminism, we should reconsider the use of generation. We should not fall into the trap of distinguishing as separate categories grandmothers, mothers and daughters, parents, fathers, sons. But that we could use a new way of thinking about time by rethinking generations. What I want to do, invited to talk about history, is to turn from time to place. What I will argue is that it is not only a rethinking of time that we need to understand contemporary feminism, but that we also have to reconsider the way we conceptualize space and place. I will start, however, with a time trip, and I will show you a few women feminists, maybe, from the past. And I will ask the question that Roxanne Gay, whom you just saw, asked, are they feminists? Are they bad feminists? The first one is Christine Pizan, a woman born in Italy, writing in France in the 14th century, earning her living after her father and then her husband died and she had to take care of 3 children, by writing books about the position of women. Not sociological modern books, but medieval texts using allegory, description via biblical history, via mythological history, defending the position of women and entering the debate that was then called the struggle about women, asking whether, it was not really about women, it was about whether men could be holy if they married. There were Catholics who said a real holy man can only be so in celibacy. Others said that marriage was God-given and that in that sense women would not be fatal for men if they married. She joined that debate by defending women as not being totally the total danger for the holiness of men they aspired. Christine Pizan, was she a feminist? There was no feminism at the time. She was a Catholic. She accepted many of the rules of the church. She defended in her stories many women, but she also played by the rules that gender ideology of that time put on her. I have, if you can see it at your screen, every time taken a contemporary picture. This is one of the illustrations from her own book. She was a good manager in getting her books published. And next to it is a school in France called after her, so the Collège Christine Pizan. Every time I will pay a little attention to the way names from women in the past have been retaken, reincorporated in contemporary time. Was she a feminist? Was she a bad feminist? I won't answer. Olympe de Gouges, a woman in 18th century France, who was involved in the French Revolution, and who, shortly after the famous Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen were written, published her own text, Declaration on the Rights of Women as Citizens, the Femme et la Citoyenne. Her text was not so famous at the time as the male version, that traveled all over the world and is now seen as the beginning of modern politics. She herself, but there she was not an exception, was killed in the terror as being not politically yet on the right side in the end. Was she a feminist? She participated in the French Revolution, so she participated in the ideals of equality, fraternity and liberty. She asked for women to have the same rights as men. Is that feminism? Is it feminism to ask for the same rights or the same position as men? Is that feminism? Is it bad feminism? I leave it to you. Sojourner Truth, a woman who was born in slavery in the United States on actually a Dutch-speaking farm. Her first language was Dutch farmers, plantation owners, who became an active in the abolitionist movement. So she spoke about her own experiences of slavery, and she spoke against slavery and was part of the abolitionist movement, and she spoke about the role of women. Famous words from her are the words, "Ain't I a woman?" She spoke them in 1851 in Ohio at the Convention on Women's Rights, where she spoke about black women as being also women. She took a famous phrase from the abolitionist movement, "Ain't I a man?" So there were many in his early history of the 19th century abolitionist images of a man in slavery who asked, "Ain't I a man?" claiming humanity for those who were enslaved, living in slavery. She took that, using it both in her abolitionist against slavery movement and in her emancipation of women. "I am also a woman. Ain't I a woman?" And apparently she spoke this with a Dutch accent. That's a nice word. Those words have become very famous. I put her on the, she has been put on a stand. And you can imagine American feminists, black activists thinking we need more women, we need more black people on US stamps. Because when stamps are still important. Was she a feminist? She did not call herself a feminist. She used a language that had very patriarchal overtones. "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a man?" Buying into the difference between those two. Is that feminism? Is that bad feminism? Last one. Nelly Kroes, a Dutch politician who made a career. She has spoken out for the quotum rules, saying if there had not been a policy appointing women to make sure that there's a number of women, a minimum number of women in a committee, I would never have made my career. That was a very brave thing to say, because quota in the Netherlands, as you probably know, is a thing that you don't advocate. It's a sign that women are not strong enough to make a career on their own. She made that career, she became one of the most powerful. ICT was her job in the European Commission. She made her career and she still said, "I only am here because at a certain moment somebody said we need a woman." Is she a feminist? Sometimes she calls herself a feminist, but not often. She is very in favor of Europe, not a very popular position at this moment. We see her below a drawing of her where she advocates more women in ICT. She is buying into the neoliberal language of Europe as meant to increase the economic competition and the power to compete with other economic powers. Is she a feminist? Is she a bad feminist? Stick to Sir John True. There's already a blue flag hanging. These questions confront us with the point that feminism is an emancipation movement that started in the 19th century. There was no feminism before the 19th century, if you define it by the word. The word was not there. What does it mean that feminism is something that came into existence in the 19th century? It confronts us with an inheritance. We inherit things from the 19th century that are still with us today. Let me try to describe them to you short. In the 19th century, emancipation movements came into existence combining ideas from the Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, dare to think, be independent, you know him, and the follow-up of the historical social movements, social emancipation movement that defined themselves via history, speaking about the emancipation of the working class, the middle class, the emancipation of slaves, the emancipation of women. Social movements that identified via history. This was possible in the 19th century, in the post-enlightenment, in the enlightenment atmosphere, because knowledge about the world, different places and different histories became common can see the different phases in the history and the development of humanity. Some people are backward. They are not yet where we are already. A comparative, hierarchical conception of time. Humanity developed throughout the ages and we get better and better. Some people are not yet there. A comparative element that tied in nicely with colonialism and imperialism. And here is my point about time and place. It was about Europe as having a privileged position in time, but also having a privileged position in space. Time was projected on different spaces. People could imagine that there were continents, islands, jungles far away that were still prehistoric. You could imagine time by looking at history. Emancipation movements in the 19th century took over or came into existence by this conception of time. This is the period that progress narratives were invented. It is a narrative that speaks about gradual or revolutionary improvement of the human race or the human rationality. You can think about socialism and Marxism invented in the 19th century. You can think about nationalism, speaking about the history of nations as improving and liberating themselves. We can now also understand how the connection between feminism and abolitionism against slavery work together. Slavery is something from the past. The progressive future is a future without slavery, where everybody is free, where everybody is equal, where we are all brothers or sisters. Both the strong points and the weak points, complicated points of feminism today, I would argue, have a connection with this complicated 19th century history. Because feminism has taken over until well into the middle of the 20th century, this idea of progress and emancipation, that it is a way forward, that women in the past were suffering and in the future will be liberated. A struggle for equal rights, not having them in the past and expecting them to have them in the future. A linear, historical, chronological conception of improvement. And it is a great idea. It brings political movements together. Many of us today still are, and I confess guilty, think about how the world could be improved. Think about progress. Think about what is bad and what you can do to give more peace, less terrorism, more equality, less poverty. This idea of progress is nice and inviting. At the same time, when it is projected on the world as something that structures how everybody is, you divide the world into people who are already there and not yet there. You might recognize some of the discourse that some forms of feminism use as the emancipation of women having been completed here and not yet completed in other countries. Having been completed with higher educated people in Western Europe, but are still lagging behind in migrant communities. The language of progress has, apart from its inviting and inspiring elements, also elements of distinguishing the world into those who are not yet there. I think that lots of the discussions on feminism circle around this conception, that sometimes it is considered to be taken feminism as a position that you are outside history and can judge what is the right direction, thereby excluding many from participation in that conversation, because it is a placing. You place people in time, you place them at another place and say you're not yet there. I think that much of the feminism of the late 20th century has tried and is trying to do away with this inheritance of the 19th century. I think the work on generational feminism of Ines van der Tuin is one of the examples of trying to feminism without taking over the progress narratives, the linear chronology, without a dualism between a bad past and a good future, those who are aware and emancipated and those who are not yet. Trying to think of feminism outside this model of a history where humanity is at the center, a big story of mankind towards fulfillment, and to try to think in another way about time. If you see many of the new feminist movements in this way, there is an effort, an attempt to not go with those binary oppositions. If you see the Roxanne Gay video, you will see to the end, you will see that how she takes examples of things that are often presented as opposites. So she gives examples that do away with creating this binary opposition. This is emancipated, this is not. And I think this is a very exciting way of thinking about feminism and trying to think about politics that don't take over 19th century conceptions of time and of the division of the world in different nations. And of course, I think about being here united as international relations students, thinking about relations between nations beyond the opposition of emancipated, modern, and backward. This means that every feminist from the past, every bad feminist from the past, every woman who was not a feminist from the past, can be reclaimed, reinvented, again invited in the discussion. It is, if we go back, very easy to say Olympe de Gouges, with her Declaration of the Rights of Women, was a feminist. She stood at the beginning of equal rights. If we look at Christine de Pizan, it is a kind of unsettling, it is a timeless, she talks about things that we think is superstition or too religious. But she speaks again to us when we do away with this historical narrative. We no longer have to choose whether this is a good woman or a bad woman, but we can, good feminist, a bad feminist, but we can try to think about how can we think about the relations between the genders or the gendered identities that our society knows, trying not to think within the progress narrative. That means that rethinking time and rethinking place go hand in hand. If feminism wants to take serious its invitation to get rid of the 19th century, we should and no longer speak of feminism in the West or Western feminism, but think about feminism as something with many faces and many situations. It means that we can reclaim foremothers. We don't have to say that they are very feminist avant la lettre, being very clever, although not yet knowing the word, but we can try and listen what we can hear from their way of presenting their thoughts and their situation about the position of women. And it means that we will never again follow the 19th century in its pseudo-innocent suggestion that there is a non-place from where we can speak about humanity. We will always have to ask, where is it that we speak? We speak here at Utrecht University. That's a specific place. Think about your chair. Think about the money that brought you here, as I do. And that's a good starting point to think about feminism and its history. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this lovely lecture. I would now like your attention for Peta Hinton. To begin with, I'd like to thank the SIB for organising this event and for the opportunity to speak tonight. The focus of my contribution is the subject of feminism. I don't have PowerPoint slides, I'm doing this the old-fashioned way, whatever that might be. So while this subject might seem to be broadly construed, my interests lie specifically with those questions of
what constitutes or counts as contemporary feminist politics and a feminist voice. And with those questions, this is where my own feminist orientations are located. And these questions present in complicated ways, primarily because of that issue of what is proper to contemporary feminism is one that can't simply be resolved in the way that I want to approach it today. What we find instead is paradox and tensions comprise feminist politics as its political subject, and a new materialist perspective such as the one that Iris von der Tuin gives us in her Generation of Feminisms is one that attends to precisely these tensions. So with a nod to its past and with the help of von der Tuin's work, I want to pick up this question of what is proper to contemporary feminism through a new materialist lens in two ways. To ask after feminism's critical concerns and the way its political dimensions and directions are formulated. So there's a lot of crossover with Professor Waaldijk's talk and my own. I think that's granted given the topic that we're picking up with and how we're doing it. So where to begin? A question which presupposes another question: what is a beginning? And I'm prompted to paraphrase some half-forgotten paraphrasing of Jacques Derrida's poem, to start where you are. I can't tell you what text I gleaned it from, nor in what context, but it carries with me as this refreshing memory, or a memory that's refreshed, when I feel like I'm standing at some threshold, some beginning. It came to me again a few weeks ago when I started the introductory lecture to the course I'm currently teaching in the Gender Studies program, Contemporary Feminist Debates. I was soliciting student responses to our first text, An Irony in Terms, Wendy Brown's The Impossibility of Women's Studies. And where the question that we were raising through that was the fact of there being a set of contemporary feminist debates that provide the grist for an entire course that we're setting up within the Gender Studies program. So if we've got an impossibility of women's studies, we've also got the fact of there being some sort of notion of what is a feminist debate, how we might understand feminist politics. And in this location, at this time, in this syllabus, if we quickly glance at it, there are a couple of discussions that we're taking up with. The production and consumption of post-colonial texts in a global economy, women's participation in the generation of welfare systems and the influence for how we understand or undertake feminist work today, concepts of transition and change, connections with post-secular analysis and the role of religion in and for feminist inquiry. So that's just some sense of what that syllabus is looking at, and even located in this way, and this limited to the debates that the staff in the Gender Studies program at Utrecht are interested in. We can see that what counts under the terms of contemporary feminism generates a busy conversation. If we were putting these interests into this hall, I could somehow imagine a conversation where there's a lot of voices taking place. The concerns, or which concerns speak louder than others, which questions should take priority, which perspectives give us the best means by which to isolate the issues and problematics that we consider to be most in need of response. I think we would have probably some arguments and a bit of a shouting match within that space. In the lecture that we had a couple of weeks ago, we had an opportunity to workshop our ideas of what constitutes as a feminist politics. And there again, the input from the students showed an astounding diversity. Mechanisms of exclusion, dichotomous thinking, underrepresentation, language, rights, normativity, marginalisation, violence, discourse, and hegemony, just some of the foci that presented as concerns for contemporary feminism. Inclusion, collectivity, participation, mobilisation, acceptance, resistance, self-definition, intersectionality, just some of the approaches for their address. The law, policy, the individual, bodies, social justice programs, welfare, activist collectives, language and aesthetic practices, being some of the potential sites for intervention. So, to say the least, this was an eye-opening exercise, more than a curious investment of time in considering the diversity of what constitutes as a feminist politics in contemporary terms. But how are we to understand this diversity? Where did it start? Is it something new? And what does it suggest about the scope of feminist politics? About who and what should be represented under the rubric of feminist inquiry? If we take a wander through the last 60 years or so, of what marks out a feminist politics. The story could be a very familiar one to many. From the advent of Simone de Beauvoir's claim that one is not born but rather becomes a woman, we get a feminist trajectory that organises around its actors, its domains, and its goals in specific ways. Constructions of women, as much as material practices that are organised through these constructions, take the focus of second wave feminism that's said to commence with Beauvoir's claim. And strategies for address ranging from segregationist claims for autonomy to the need for equality within social institutions and domestic relations maintain the interest. What this second wave of feminism boils down to then is its interest in making visible the different forms of women's social marginalisation and in finding ways to address these in terms of a notion of power organised through the dynamics of domination and oppression and an identity politics that presumes woman as its foundation. It's these ideas of categorisation, power and identity that we could call third wave feminisms that they've sought to trouble, and although the transition is not clear between second and third wave feminism, the narrative is. Third wave feminisms isolate the normative subject of feminism, the white heterosexual woman, as the proper subject of a second wave feminist politics, and seek to redress this, to introduce a different subject of feminism, the subject in its embodied difference. So, with theories of sexual difference, third world feminisms and methodologies such as the politics of location and intersectionality, we're drawn away from these ideas of collectivity that presumably presume an homogeneity, to consider instead relations of difference, different inequalities and modes of voicing plurality. The temporal strata for this developmental approach to how we might understand the scope of feminist political work is clearly linear. We move from a singularity or universal notion of woman to that of women in their difference, to diversity and questions of difference itself. And this linear narrative represents precisely this idea of feminist political action as a movement forwards. It is a political landscape of hope, as Ahmed and others have pointed out, that will reawaken the capacity for power relations and structures to manifest differently and in specifically emancipatory directions. So this seems to be our dominant story for how we conceive of feminist politics. Nevertheless, there's a disturbing glitch in the contemporary feminist matrix. Post-feminist claims for feminism's outdatedness, premised on a vocabulary of "we have achieved." If I could put it crudely, I might call this past feminism's pathos, the teleological sublimation of that striving for recognition and diversity. In this present, as we've seen through different anti-feminist social media campaigns, such as Why I'm Not a Feminist, and repopularisations of the feminist as the angry misandrist, feminism only serves to recapitulate a gendered power dynamics in terms that now favour the feminist, and who this feminist is seems to be barely contested. She is a woman. On the other hand, feminism maintains its purchase in this context, but through a different performance. Johanna Oksala points out we're witnessing a contemporary feminism that finds definition through the neoliberal emphasis on individual empowerment. This neoliberal subject of feminism is born of the same narrative direction as second and third wave feminisms. That is, the more recent emphasis on discourse and a distrust of grand narratives has undermined a systemic analysis of capitalist systems. A corresponding global rise in neoliberalism has thus served to underline individual acts of resistance as a better feminist politics. So what we have are some examples that Oksala draws on from recent feminist research. As long as they're pursuing their own interests, how women speak, dress or express sexuality is irrelevant. The real issues of feminism are about personal freedom, economic independence and professional success in all areas of employment. The increasing pornification of all aspects of everyday life is no longer understood in opposition to feminist political aims, but is instead seen as evidence that feminism has already achieved its goals. The fact that women too read Playboy and get Brazilian bikini waxes is increasingly understood as a sign of their liberation and their empowerment. The remedy to this is surprising, a return to collective politics perhaps, working within a socialist paradigm now, doing feminist work that's oriented towards a structural analysis of global capitalism, a return to the past in in other words, are some of the remedies that Oksala identifies to addressing this neoliberal subject of feminism. They do indicate an attempt to open up conversations with past feminisms, but they don't give us the political apparatus to respond to that question one of my students posed in our workshopping exercise, and a question that Professor Waaldijk has also conveyed in her lecture tonight, of how there seem to be different contemporaries, different presents that demand different feminisms in response to different needs. In other words, recourse to the past does not constitute as an attempt to rethink the chronology that has led us to this subject of feminism. It's in this vein that Elizabeth Gross's work on the timeliness and the untimeliness of feminism is particularly interesting. She notes that feminism is marked by both the need to address a past that has failed to provide a space and time for women as women, as much as feminism is an untimely project. In the way that she reads it, it's out of time, filled with potential for present and future, and a becoming more or becoming other that orients it towards the unknown. And it's along the lines of Gross's reading of time that Iris von der Tuin's work in generational feminism picks up. She's most interested in the way feminist epistemologies are positioned and the discourse or the dialogue there between third-wave feminist epistemologies. And what she identifies as most problematic in the discussions that are being had between these fields, these areas of feminist analysis, is a dialecticism. It's a dialecticism that's basing the difference between second and third wave work on the basis of sequential negations, a progress narrative that aims for increasing sophistication and diversity, ways of redressing the limitations of the old in the name of the new. For von der Tuin, this dialecticism can't be sustained for clear reasons. It ignores a complex generationality that third wave epistemology is able to disclose. It sets up an opposition between classes of feminist work that celebrates diversified feminist analyses over and above the universal aspirations of sisterhood or activist feminism and its presumed identity politics. Instead, in a methodology that she's calling Jumping Generations in an earlier essay on this work, 2009, she advances a non-dialectical alternative, a non-dichotomous alternative that both reveals and disrupts generational conflict that is premised on this sort of dialecticism. Indeed, this conflict, she finds, or this idea of generationality as a progress narrative is unreal. It's here that Gross's reading of temporality as both timely and untimely is relevant because it offers what von der Tuin describes as a deterritorialization from the feminist past, without at the same time limiting feminist futures to the foreseeable and to contesting the recognised and the known. What it opens for, instead, is what Haraway calls shared conversations within feminism that engage past approaches intimately and critically without negating them. It encourages a sustainable feminist perspective that carefully pursues and implements those parts of second wave feminism that are useful for current day feminist generation. For von der Tuin, this is a new materialism. Neither second wave feminist nor post-feminist, it bridges that unreal opposition of matter, body and representation by claiming that bodies do not precede feminist engagement, they materialise or come to matter in feminist inquiry. This is a notion of the new that is to be understood not as progressive development upon the past, but as generative in the multiple and material senses of this term. So if I can return to my starting point, that question of where do we start, what I think von der Tuin's notion of generational feminism as a generative feminism offers us is that starting where we are is never the same place, regionally, thematically or temporally, nor is the we of a feminist politics ever able to be given before the work of feminism. A feminist politics along these lines comes not, as Karen Barrett suggests, with the empty promise of complete repair, not with the promise that we might achieve better political ends for the types of subjects we conceive in our political programs. Instead, it comes with a view to the means of our political work, which involves a sensitivity for the always complicated, always already compromised subjects of feminism. With only paradoxes to offer, we secure the terrain of our feminist subject as much as it is here that we intervene. Like Escher's two hands, we write and unwrite ourselves in our political meanderings. Or, to borrow an image presented by Barad in a public lecture she gave in Berlin in 2012, it is with a jealous head, the head of the trickster, that contemporary feminisms might be considered to look forwards and backwards simultaneously while refusing the status of a threshold or an in-between. Unable to locate a present in any absolute sense, always non-contemporaneous with itself, the subject of feminism is the work of how we define feminism itself. Not simply in discursive terms, imagining discourse to operate beyond the movements of the body, but as the materializing effects of our contributions. Thus, as Fontain's argument suggests, the identities and power relations with which we are concerned are always in both time and space, both written and unwritten, in contemporary feminist research, giving us already unpredictable readings of past texts and future feminist possibilities. This approach refuses the doxa of response and any corresponding moralism, that expectation that accompanies what is proper to and what should be defended as a political voice or the motivations for political inquiry and action. Instead, feminist political practice constitutes as both a responsibility for and a response to what we engage as the contemporary subjects of feminism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Now we will take a break, and before you walk out the door, please note the lovely people of Savannah Bay, the one and only women's bookshop with their stand. I would like to see you back in 10 minutes. As you can see, our discussion panel has joined us, and they're going to introduce themselves right now, so we'll start over here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ines and I study history.
Good evening. I'm Michael and I study governance and organizational sciences.
I definitely don't study technology, as you can see. I study anthropology, and my name is Isabel.
Hi, I'm Merlin and I study philosophy.
I'm Laurie and I studied philosophy and gender studies.
I'm Lotte and I study liberal arts and sciences and a major in international relations.
And as you can see, our two guest speakers have joined us as well. And now we're going to go to the statement which they are going to debate tonight, and that is, in the Western world, feminism is completed. And I would like to ask you first, Laurie, from gender studies perspective, can you say something about this?
Yeah, sure. I think as we just heard in both of the lectures, feminism is something that's always continuously evolving, or maybe not evolving, because that implies too much of a progress narrative. But it's constantly moving, it's constantly differing from itself, within itself. So the word completed suggests that there is a linear development that at some point starts, arises from a problem, and then finishes. I don't think we should see feminism like that. I think it's a social movement, a theory that is constantly changing, and is something that can, at every point, add value, add a new perspective. So in that view, no, I would definitely say feminism is not completed and is probably never completed.
Okay, thank you. So feminism as a social movement. Ines, can you react to that?
Well, I was actually wondering, what do you see as feminism in a woman's daily life? I mean, if we look at working facilities, options, jobs, we've improved so much. If I would like to write a paper, give lectures. I'm able to do that nowadays. However, there are still men in Utrecht who harass me on a monthly basis maybe, but in other countries in the world, Western countries for example, there are women who are harassed maybe on a daily basis. So let's say you only take the last example, then yes, feminism may not be ended. If you take the first example, I think feminism has ended.
Okay, so you say I do have all the job opportunities I need right now, but in my day-to-day social life, I still experience this inequality between men and women.
So my question is, where do you draw the line?
Marilyn, can you give us a philosophical response to that?
Maybe not necessarily philosophical, but I think it's definitely not done right now, since there's such a big backlash, at least from what I'm seeing, in the younger generations. I mean, especially since He for She came out from Emma Watson. I've noticed quite a huge backlash from people from my age, and especially men who've started to experience feminism as something that is a bad word, is a taboo. And I hadn't experienced that in such a way before. So I think right now it's more important that it's not done at all. That it's something that's starting to get value again.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you would like to react to feminism as a bad word?
See, especially also in Dutch politics, there are still many more men than women, and in that sense, it's really strange that to have such a statement when Holland has never had a female prime minister, and in some countries that we would maybe call less developed, they did have more prominent female leaders in the country, and that's what I want to say.
Nice. So, female leadership in politics. Maybe Michal, you can join in.
Yes, we do see that there's a lot of inequality in the percentages of women in politics and high functions in business, and however strange it might be, I think that in this case positive discrimination or quotas is a great way to ensure that there is a fair share of women in politics. And a year ago, I went to a lecture of Jennifer Lawless, and she stated that women generally, even when they are equally qualified, equally competent, and they would be great for a job, they generally view themselves as not as good. So even if it's just a quota for the amount of applicants, I think that would help a lot to help women in politics.
Thank you very much. Maybe our guest speakers would like to react to this?
What I'm hearing is what I broadly call something around problem of definition. What I'm also hearing is a lot of responses that seem to, and rightly so, take up with existing contexts, practices, representative practices, or lack of representation, different ways of positioning different bodies, I would say. So there's a very clear mapping of a woman and woman subject to, and this is part of what I was trying to draw attention to in the lecture, to what constitutes as the interest of the work of feminism. I'm not saying that's incorrect, not at all, but I think that by limiting the scope of our discussions about what feminism is or does or represents to only these terms is one that's problematic. This idea that I was drawing through Iris Honderton's work on generationality is precisely that idea of the generative work of feminism. And without going back into that for now, pointing to the idea of it also doing the work of constructing or creating different possibilities as well as potentially the avenues that don't work. for feminism is something we need to address, but also the other point that I just lost sight of trying to explain that. Nope, it's going to come back, and if you don't mind, I will bring it up because it was something that was running through my head as I was listening that I wanted to throw in as response.
I think I would have take issue with the idea that you can say feminism is completed within the West, because I think the world is so interdependent that it would be really difficult to say here it is solved and there it is not. That is my main problem with the thesis at this moment.
One of the examples that I might give to sort of highlight what I'm hearing in a lot of the discussions is when we take up now with precisely that idea of can a man be a feminist, it sort of draws our attention very clearly to, well, what bodies map to particular feminist representative practices and so on, which bodies are feminist. And I think that still needs to be addressed, rather than us being able to claim whether feminism has ended.
All right, so the problem of definition of feminism, and can a man be a feminist? That's a very good question. Would you like to react to that, Isabel?
No, not particular to that, but to what Merlin said. He was talking about that our generation is not that much concerned about feminism, and it's also, well, thinks it's a bit of a weird thing. And that might be due to the fact that we have talked about the word women for 100 times this evening, I guess, and maybe we have said the word man for a couple of times. And I think it's weird that when we are talking about gender, we are talking about women. It's a weird thing because equality is also something about men.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask whether the audience has anything to react to this. And I see one question in the back. If you just wait for the microphone.
You mentioned the point that you were talking most about women, and then you brought up men. But there's one point that we in the back thought was missing, and that was queer and trans subjectivities in this whole story. So I was wondering what the panel speakers and the rest of you think of that.
Who would like to answer this question?
I'm not sure there's really if you should really make a difference. If we're talking about equality, we're talking about real equality, I think. And that would mean trans people as well. So I'm not sure we would have to make differences between that. By the way, I would like to say on the subject of whether feminism is over or not, pretty much all of my friends which are female still struggle with being hassled or almost assaulted sexually on the streets a couple of times in their life. And I'm not sure male friends of mine can really understand that well, which I think breeds a lot of the hardships that comes with the taboo of feminism in my age right now. But I don't think we can say feminism is over until that is sort of at least dealt with. I mean, my male friends can't understand my female friends when they're being assaulted, and they don't really see it happening, but it still happens. So
you do connect feminism to whether sexual violence is still present in a women's life?
Yeah, of course, because it plays a part in that as well, I think.
Okay, nice. Ines, would you like to react to that?
If we go on in the perspective of sexual violence, then so if I'm right, what you're actually saying is that men can't understand it because they are not assaulted as being a woman.
No, not at all. But I think a lot of men that I discuss these things with don't seem to want to understand as much. And what I see is that once they don't see it, they don't want to see it.
Okay, but a lot of men does not mean all men.
No, of course.
So what I think is that even when it's a little part of the men who live in the world, still men can be feminists, because when they do understand and when they do seem to recognize that a woman is harassed, assaulted in any way possible, when they do understand that, they can stand up for these women and say, hey, you're out there, I protect you, or I understand you.
Thank you.
I don't think it's impossible.
No. Okay.
But I believe that there are indeed a lot of men who don't feel involved in any discussion on gender, and this is a huge part due to the fact that we are talking a lot about women, and more than we are talking about men. And I think that one of the like maybe you can call it like techniques to incorporate or to make the gender discussion more about gender is to also involve trans bodies into the discussion, to show that not everyone is like can be put into one of the boxes. There are a lot of people who cross over who don't fit into the boxes.
Yeah.
Maybe there are more boxes.
So do not focus on that gender binary, but broaden it up. Okay.
Yeah.
I did see a question right here in the front. Maybe a microphone.
It's not actually so much a question as a remark. What kind of strikes me in this discussion about whether feminism is completed is kind of, would anyone ever ask the question, is capitalism completed? Is communism completed? It's like, it's not just a problem that we're trying to solve, it's an actual belief system, and it's a way of thinking about the world that has lots of implications, not just the fact that there's gender inequality that needs to be solved, it's just the belief that there is that there are differences between genders, both male, female, and non-binary identities, and that they all count for something.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe there was a question here up front too.
Earlier was said that we were talking about gender and gender equality, and you said that men should be involved and trans be involved. Now I know that that's what Emma Watson said as well, it's he or she. But my opinion is rather neutral on this. But do you think that when we're talking about feminism, men should be involved, as in what their rights are, and that we should take them as we talk about feminism? So what's your opinion about that, or do you think that feminism should be only about women, because otherwise it may turn to men, even though it's a woman movement? So I was just wondering what your opinion would be about that, about involving men into feminism.
Okay, who would like to react to this question? Michael?
I think it would be greatly beneficial to involve men in this conversation. I'd like to draw a parallel to the LGBT integration. I think that would not have been possible without the help from a whole lot of straight people, and I think that in the same way there is the possibility for a whole lot of men to get involved in feminism and to help it to contribute.
Okay, thank you very much. Do our speakers wish to react to this?
Again, for me, I think the question has to be phrased or posed at a different level. Considering how I might bring men into feminism still doesn't address who it is or what it is that feminism would presume to represent. And when we're posing this question of has feminism ended in the West, I think we're presuming a certain agenda for feminism, which is one of equality. That's certainly not the only feminist agenda that we can work with. So I can't see, for me, the terms of the debate need to be also extended to, for example, why is it that so many women participate in practices of, that you could say, position them in unequally? Why is it that we're not aware of what it is that we participate in at times? And so then it's less about the presence of which type of gender is representing feminism and more about what its sort of terms of debate, again, are about.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any reactions in the audience? Here in front.
Yes. Yes, thank you. What I really liked about today so far is that both feminism and completion have been approached very critically. But in that sense, I would also like to see a critical approach of the concept of the West, which is the first part of this question, and I understand why it's been put in. It's been put in to take away the post-colonial argument, of which we could sit here for another 5 hours, thank God. But the problem with this, and as the first lecture has talked about, there's also a role for space in determining how people think about feminism. And even the space we are in today, which is inherently academic, has influenced how this debate has taken place. So in that sense, my question would be, how do you think that each of you, out of your personal experience, your own personal spaces and histories, have been influenced in this debate?
Thank you very much. Laurie, would you like to react to this?
Could you maybe rephrase your question? You asked how our position is influenced in this debate, or what?
In the sense that all of you are from an academic space, an academic background, and I am assuming that all of you are also yourselves from the West, if not the Netherlands exclusively, and such spaces are different for different people. So as you come from a certain space, how do you think that has influenced your opinion vis-a-vis, let's say, someone from Germany or Denmark, which is also generally considered the West or the Occident?
We are all influenced by our position that we were born in and we were raised in, and that we developed ourselves in by our own choice. And that's something you can't deny, but it's very important to be aware of and to take into account that we can't answer all the questions on all the world subjects. And maybe we as Western people can't even talk about feminism in the West as a whole project. Maybe we don't even have the right perspective to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. I do see a question over there.
Well, I was raised in a situation that definitely isn't a Western situation. Israeli, Polish, and Dutch. And I noticed that my parents, they raised me very equal. So my mother, she works, my father, he works. They share things, they decide things together. And I have never noticed any inequality. And when I went to high school and when I grew up, I suddenly noticed that there are different ways of approaching men and women. And every day I still am harassed on the street, that's how you called it. And it still happens every day. And actually I don't think feminism is completed at all in any Western country yet.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody who would like to react to this here?
Hi, I'm bad at public speaking, so I might get my words confused, but I wanted to say I find it really strange that, so there's this topic in the Western world, feminism is completed, and the panel kind of automatically defaulted to defending the notion that a white, presumably white, cisgender, able-bodied woman, can still experience difficulties, and yeah, of course they can, I think they can. But what I don't understand is why you're assuming that in a Western world, women are, what I said, white, cisgender, etc. And why we've kind of been talking about that, and even before considering the struggles of women of colour, trans women and disabled women, we've started talking about men and feminism, which is a topic that is brought up every single time. We need to talk about trans women, we need to talk about you know, women with mental health issues, which is a big thing in academia right now, I think. You know, we can't just keep talking about men and feminism all the time. That's been done. I mean, let's just talk, sorry, this is going on for a while. Let's just talk about other women other than white, cisgender, able-bodied women.
But you do agree that men also need to discuss the disabled women and the black women and how they can be...
No, not really.
Not really, okay, nice, cool. I do see a question over here.
I have a question which was based actually on somebody else from the audience said, which was, someone said feminism is a belief system, it's not a problem to be solved or the solution to a problem. And I was really curious, just, there's a lot of people, but to ask everybody, like, is that something you agree with, or is it something you have a different idea about, especially if you have a different idea of it?
Okay, feminism as a belief system.
Well, for me it is, because I am not from a gender academic background or something. So a lot of times, because I'm interested in it, a lot of times I struggle with arguing about my position, giving people academic reasons why my beliefs are in a certain way. But at the moment I decided for myself that an academic discussion is a good thing, but for me I don't need it for myself to have certain beliefs about feminism.
Okay, so you use feminism to put yourself into this academic environment and not really searching the debate with others. Okay, that's nice. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to say anything about this? No questions at all. Look at there.
Who would think feminism in the Western world is completed in the sense that there is gender equality?
Maybe we can do a poll.
Yeah.
Raise your hands if you think that gender equality is acquired in the Western world at this moment. So we do have a lot to talk about. I believe this sir in the front would like to react to the student panel as well.
I have one different question. This is one for Michael specifically. You said, if I understood you correctly, if I heard correctly, I think you said, if this is what you said at the very beginning, if someone has a similar qualification, if a woman has a similar qualification, similar age, similar experience, that they're disadvantaged, and you said it's because one of the reasons is because of a negative self-image or insecurity or something like that. And that was, you brought that as a, that would be a good reason for a quote. And I couldn't quite follow that logic, but I'm not sure if that's what you said, so could you maybe clarify?
That's more or less what I said. It's an article by Fox and Law. It's called Gender Perception and Political Candidacies, a central barrier to women's equality in electoral politics. And it shows that women who are equally suited for a job generally perceive themselves not to be as well suited as their male competitors. So indeed I use that to support quota, even if not for the jobs themselves, then for the applications.
Okay, thank you very much. Due to the time, we have room for one more question. Over there.
Thank you. With all this talk of stopping to think about feminism in a linear sense and stopping to think about it in a Western sense and looking at multiple places in the world, a very loud alarm bell goes up in my head, and that is moral relativism. And I wonder if the panel, maybe the guest speakers, have something to say about that.
Moral relativism. Shoot.
Yes, it's a problem if you define. Is this okay? Yeah. Moral relativism is a problem if you think that there is a moral absolute, and then you would say it would be terrible to have to admit that there might be positions that are not the same as mine. So yes, I'm in favor of equality, but I would not say that somebody who is not in favor of that, or who defines feminism not primarily, as we did this evening, through equal rights for women and men, but via another way, would be less aware or morally inferior to my schedule, my way of thinking. So in a way, I would say I don't have a problem with moral relativism, because I think we should always be relative and think where and who is saying something. So the moment when somebody who has all the power speaks about equality is different from the moment when somebody who is totally powerless and invisible speaks about equality. And that is relativism, because you take into account who is speaking, where is she, he, it speaking.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of this discussion. Would any of the panel members would like to make some concluding remarks on the discussion?
Well, maybe now is a good time to also include the comment that you just made, and to kind of apply it to the moral relativism. I think it's feminism is very much a theory, an academic pursuit, but also still something that's activist. And because we cannot say what is good for us or what we think is good for someone else, everyone in the end has to make kind of fight their own fight. And that are now that have been like the lower class, the middle class, former slaves, women, but there are still so many small minorities, people that are subjugated. They're still there. They have to fight their own fight. It has to come from within those groups, or those just people, those individuals. But it does not mean that we can't support them. I mean, I as a cisgendered white Dutch woman can support a lot of people that come from a different place than I come from. And I think that's important to see that we cannot decide for someone else what's good, but we can offer support if there's a fight for equality and equal rights.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I would also like to thank the audience for the nice questions, and the student panel and our guest speakers for the lovely evening and the good discussion.